Hi, Danny. Thanks for coming on and talking with me today.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me.
So, you wrote a really cool book called Serving the Servant, your book about your experiences with Kurt Cobain as the manager for Nirvana. For a little background, could you just go over a little bit of what your role was in working with Kurt and Nirvana as the manager? What did that look like?
I had a management company that started in the 1980s and kept going through the early 90s called Gold Village. No, that's my current company, Gold Mountain Entertainment. That was, and Gold Mountain is just basically means Goldberg. And the oh jeez the we had mostly older rock artists, the Allman Brothers, Bonnie Raitt, Ricky Lee Jones. Bonnie had won the Grammy, the album of the year, and several other Grammys in '89. And I had wanted to get into the younger rock world, what was then called sort of postmodern, or the outbreak of sort of '80s punk becoming a little more mainstream with bands like Jane's Addiction and REM, kind of the alternative rock world. Hired a young guy named John Silva, who today is an incredibly successful manager. At that time, he was starting his career. And together we signed Sonic Youth, and that was a big breakthrough because they had such enormous credibility in the subculture and among other artists. And through Sonic Youth, we were introduced to Nirvana. I was hesitant then, as I am now, to take on new artists because you don't make money usually the first couple of years with the new artist, and you got to pay the bills when you have a service company of employees.
Yeah.
But Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth really said that I would be making a mistake not to work with them if I could, because he thought they were the best band that he had seen, and he was the ultimate tastemaker and curator of the next generation of rock and roll, and I trusted him completely. So luckily for me, I believed him, and luckily for us, Nirvana wanted to be with us. I think probably Thurston talked to them too. I suspect that's So it was really the marriage that Sonic Youth made, and that was in end of 1990. Kurt had written a lot of the songs for Nevermind, not all of them yet, and Bleach had already come out and created a footprint for them in the college radio world and the world of punk-leaning fanzines. It was on Sub Pop, which was an indie label, and they were frustrated, Kurt in particular, that the record wasn't always in the stores when they were traveling, and they weren't always getting paid on time, and he really wanted them to be with a major label and wanted a management company to oversee that. And if we were good enough for Sonic Youth, he figured we were good enough for Nirvana. I say Kurt because even though there were three members in the band, he made most of the big decisions. And at that time, Dave Grohl had just joined the band literally a few weeks earlier when we met them. And Kristen and Kurt were friends from high school, but Kurt was the songwriter, the lead singer, the lead guitar player, and the final decision maker.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the book came out 25 years after he passed. What made you want to write it, and how did you go about putting it together?
Well, it had been in the back of my mind for a long time to maybe write a book about working with them, and knowing that date was coming up was sort of a one way to do it, and it fit the rest of my schedule in terms of my life, having the time to do it. So it took me just about a year to write it, and so I started it a couple of years before it came out, and I went about it first by rereading everything that everyone else had written about Nirvana and Kurt, in particular Michael Azerrad's Come As You Are and Charlie Cross's book and Everett True's book. Those to me are the three best books that had been written about the band. And researching, there's fantastic websites that have every review and interview, and going through and organizing my own memory, going through my own files and notes. And then I interviewed about 30 people or so, people that, most of the people that were around were happy to talk to me. A few of them didn't want to. There's a lot of painful feelings, obviously, about Kurt's tragic death. But, 90% of the people I wanted to talk to, I talked to, and that was really helpful. It triggered memories. So, the purpose of the book was sort of my version of working of Kurt's story. It's circumscribed by starting really when I started to work with him. I have one chapter doing a backstory for just general readers about the roots of what influenced Kurt, but it's primarily a story of my working with him, and it's through my perspective as one of the managers. And but talking to other people really helped get other points of view about things that I was at, and also triggered memories, because memory is freaky. Sometimes you don't remember anything, and then you're talking to somebody and suddenly it triggers a whole thing. So I talked to everybody I could think of that was pertinent. Virtually everybody at the record company worked with them, and Chris was very generous with his time. Courtney was very generous with her time, and so, some of the people I used to work with, and some assortment of other people. And then the work is writing, which is the main work. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who said this, but for me, the biggest part of writing is rewriting. You kind of have a notion of what you want to say, but to actually organize it in a way that flows and reads, is that's 90% of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked the way that you wrote it, and that it wasn't a biography. It was like, it was your perspective. And so it was, it was fun.
Correct.
Yeah. It was fun reading it, because it felt like, it felt like I could like put on your glasses and I was like experiencing the thing through your eyes, instead of kind of like which biographies, they have their place and they're useful, but it was kind of it was a fun lens to read it through, to like learn about these people. When you first watched the band perform, what did that feel like?
I was really excited. When we first met them, I had never seen them perform, even though they had done a number of dates opening to Sonic Youth. I hadn't been at any of those shows. It was a European tour that I didn't go to. I think Silva went to some of those shows and he had seen them, but I hadn't seen them. And I was really busy then. We had like 30 or 40 clients, and I think 25 people working for me. And, it definitely made sense. And I wanted to do it if Thurston wanted to do it. And Silva was so passionate about it. And I knew that they had this reputation, but I kind of cubbyholed it in my mind. And then after a few months of them being a client, it just started bothering me that I hadn't seen them live. And Kurt wanted to play a show in LA, just to play some of the songs that were going to be on Nevermind. It's a process a lot of artists like to do, of playing songs in front of audiences before they record them, just to get a feel for how it connects with people. And and all that, and so I guess John, or the agency, booked a gig opening to Dinosaur Jr. at a rock, kind of small rock theater, or a big rock club called the Palace. It was one of those places where you have to stand, no seating. And I was just shocked at how intensely Kurt connected with the audience, and the intimacy and the depth of the connection. It was really kind of hard to put into words, but I knew immediately when I saw them live that I had really gotten very lucky to have made the kind of quick decision to work with them. And it was only after that I realized who the band was, and who Kurt was, in terms of the full dimensions of it. It was like a glimpse into what was going to happen. So after that, I paid a lot more attention.
Yeah. I mean, the way that you mentioned his connection with the audience it's really crazy, the impact that it seemed like he was able to have with people that listened to him. And I've heard you talk multiple times about the lasting impact of Nirvana, and them still being prevalent today. Just yesterday in one of my classes, I saw a girl with a Nirvana t-shirt on. So it was funny, like, knowing that I was going to do this. I was like,
oh, nice. Yeah, that was seeing those t-shirts year after year was really one of the motivators for me in wanting to do the book, because it just reinforced to me that what he did in his short life was still part of the culture. In any generation, 90+% of whatever the music is that's very popular fades and becomes just an object of nostalgia for the people that were there then, but doesn't carry on. But every once in a while, there's an artist whose work transcends their own generation. I think that's true of Bob Marley. I think it's true of the Beatles, and I think it's true of Nirvana. You know, that like you said, people who weren't even alive when Kurt died are wearing T-shirts with the
Yeah.
name of his band on it. You know, and I don't think it's just the name or the I think it's connected to a body of work that speaks to authenticity, sincerity, articulating kind of some of the pain of being a young person, particularly a teenager, and tremendous sort of empathy, which was Kurt's primary thing. You know, he referred to himself as an empath, and that was part of how he connected with people. They just felt they knew him personally somehow,
Yeah.
based on reading an interview or hearing a song or even looking at a picture. Again, John Lennon had that quality. I think Taylor Swift and Springsteen have that quality among contemporary artists, and Kurt had that. And it's one of those things that you can't learn in school. You know,
Yeah.
it's really, I think it's a God-given gift.
Is it just kind of this presence that he had, just genuine authenticity that made people feel like they were connecting with him and felt accepted? Because that seemed to be one of the things that he was really good at, was making
Yeah.
people feel at home, especially when they felt a little bit alienated in
Yeah, because I
general.
think that they knew he was one of them. You
Yeah.
know, he had come from a tiny little town where he was bullied, and other than Chris, really no one understood him, and he felt he was an outsider and was tuned into this sort of creative world in a way. So he really he knew what he was talking about when he was writing about those things, and people could feel that, kind of the way the great blues singers connected with people based on lived experience. He'd had the lived experience of being an outsider, and could kind of become the voice of outsiders because he had so much talent,
Yeah.
in addition to his authenticity and his openness. He had this mastery of the musical language of rock and roll and popular music. He was an incredibly good songwriter. You could hum those choruses in a way that wasn't the case, in my opinion, with any other punk influenced group. And just had this understanding of how to look in a photo and what to say in an interview, and the whole grammar of what it was to be a rock star. He had been a Beatles fan, even though they weren't part of the punk rock movement, and he was obviously too young to have experienced them in real time. And he did have some of those qualities that John Lennon had in terms of knowing how to connect with a global audience in an intimate way.
Yeah.
So in addition to the authenticity was the talent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things that it seems, at least to me, to have been underrated about him, and like you see like kind of a somewhat nonchalant persona come up about him, but you can tell in like paying attention to his interviews and from reading the book with you, like he's very sharp, and he's very smart, and that's something that I didn't like just growing up. I didn't know that about him until I had paid more attention to him. Could you touch some on just his intelligence? It feels like sometimes that kind of is gets swept under the rug a little bit.
Well, he was incredibly smart about what he did. I mean, he wasn't someone who necessarily had an academic education or knew physics or things like that. But in terms of what it was to be an artist, he had a tremendous grasp of music, an incredibly sophisticated understanding of the media and how to connect with people through the media. And he had good judgment about people. Yeah, he was very, very smart, witty, great sense of humor. And when it came to his art, he had really a crystalline clarity about what he wanted. In the studio, he made every decision. Editing the videos, he made every decision. The artwork for the records, the artwork for the T-shirts, either he designed them personally or approved every detail of them. Most of them he designed personally.
Yeah, the humor is another one I wanted to touch on, because with with some of the things that went on, and with him eventually taking his life, there's kind of an overtone with Nirvana where people kind of focus on some of the darker spots. And I think one of the things that you did well with the book, and I've heard you talk about in interviews, is wanting to showcase some of the lighter things about him and that group. And in watching some of their interviews and the footage of those guys, like they seemed hilarious and they seemed to be able to have moments where they were very playful. Is that something that you got to experience a lot?
Oh yeah, definitely. They had this. There was always sort of these two levels in my mind to a lot of Nirvana's sort of public persona. One of which was they were really wanted to be, citizens of the punk rock world, and at the same time there was sort of this ironic distance where they would kind of make fun of the whole idea of being a rock star at the same time that they were being rock stars, and I think I think the breaking of the guitar and the kicking over the drums, that was always done with a certain sense of irony. They liked doing it, but they were also sort of almost commenting on the whole phenomenon of it. Obviously, the Who had done that, in the '60s. So, and similarly, when he did the heavy metal show on MTV, Headbangers Ball, that he would show up wearing a dress because, for the most macho audience, he wanted to make the clearest statement about how much he may have music that metalheads liked, and he himself liked some metal music, but that he was not going to identify with any macho imagery, quite the opposite. And just generally speaking, he just was funny. He was witty, and the guys, that was they enjoyed a lot of kind of goofing on the whole thing. They were in a position because of the time of when they came into the music business where they could really control creatively everything they did. There were no record executives or concert promoters or managers telling them what to do or what not to do. They had the cultural power at that time. Artists did to do that, and he was funny, and that was he had a good sense of humor, and later on. He brought the comedian Bobcat Goldthwait on tour with Nirvana for several dates, and did some videos with him. He got the joke. He couldn't always laugh at the joke. Sometimes it was just his own personal demons were too great, obviously. But when he wasn't depressed or hopelessly stoned, he was one of the most fun people to be around. It sounds like a contradiction, but people are filled with contradictions.
Yeah.
Geniuses more than most. And he was a real life genius. If you believe rock and roll is an art form, he's as talented an exponent of it as anyone who ever lived. And I think other artists look at it that way too. They did when he was alive. I mean, he was very well respected among a lot of the older rock artists, people like Tom Petty and others who weren't part of the punk culture, but who just recognized the brilliance of what he was doing as a rock auteur.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's really striking about the book, and looking into him and that group more, is just the how short of a period of time it was, and
Yeah.
the legacy that they left. Like he became an icon up. I mean, one of the greats of all time in about like 3 or 4 years. Now I know he was making music leading up to that, but like
No,
there
no,
was
no.
this
I
crazy
agree with
burst.
you. It was over the course of I mean, the work he's best known for was done over the course of 3 years, and then if you want to expand it to the very first things, it's a maximum of 5 years. And that's stretching it a bit. Yeah, I think that's true. By the way, it's always struck me as one of those just weird synchronicities of the universe is that they were from Seattle, and Jimi Hendrix was also from Seattle, and Hendrix is the same situation. He had a very short career that to this day is incredibly influential. So there are people who do work that's so compelling over the course of a few years that they leave an impact. Not many of them, but I agree that he's on that very short list.
Yeah. What was that like when Nevermind came out and things just kind of popped off out of nowhere. Like, what did that feel like?
It felt great. You know, I mean, I had been in the music business since I was 18. I'd been trying to work with artists for, the better part of a decade as a manager. Or, first I was a publicist and wanted very much to, always in search of that, being in the peak and the apex of the culture. And within the course of 6 weeks between the time that Smells Like Teen Spirit was first played on a college radio station till the album just exploded as a result of the video being played in heavy rotation on MTV and the exploding sales. I mean, it just happened incredibly quickly, and it was really, really a very, very good feeling to be one of the managers of the band that everyone was talking about, not only commercially but also artistically. Because again, they're big pop hits and they're big critical favorites. It's rare that they are the same artist has both a pop hit, a big hit song, and the reverence of sort of tastemakers and critics, and again they had both at the same time. So yeah, that initial stage was just a rush. It felt great. I think the band and Kurt and everybody around them was feeling really good about it too. It within a year there were a lot of the complexities that fame brings and drug addiction brings, but at the beginning it was just awesome.
Yeah, was it disorienting at all? Especially with so many moving parts, like you have multiple band members and
I'm
yourself.
sure it was very, very disorienting to the band. I mean, these were guys that were used to traveling around in a small van and sleeping on the floors of friends or fans because they couldn't afford hotel rooms and the like. And suddenly they're in airports where I remember, their albums being sold at the airport gift shop, and being recognized. And, because the MTV era, which they came in at the peak of that, videos made people recognizable visually, as well as them knowing the songs pretty quickly. So I'm sure it was really disorienting for them. I mean, I'd been around successful artists before. I had worked with Led Zeppelin as their publicist. I had worked with Stevie Nicks when her, I had a label that put out her solo record that went to #1. Bonnie Raitt, I managed. She just won the Grammy for Album of the Year. So, I mean, I kind of knew what that felt like, and I knew how to advise them to the extent that they wanted advice. So I found it very, very enjoyable. I'm sure for the band, it had a mixed blessing. It was certainly something they'd always dreamed of. If you look at Kurt's journals from when he was a teenager, there's that book that published some excerpts from his journals. Long before he made a record deal, he was thinking about being a star, and he was doing drawings of live sold out Nirvana on marquees of mythical theaters of his imagination and things like that. So it was certainly something he had dreamed of and worked on and focused on, but the actual reality of living with it was 24/7 was weird, I'm sure. And I'm sure it was weirder for him than the other two guys because he was the singer, and singers get a lot more attention than other members of bands.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you talked about with him that was interesting, and you'll see this among various people that you could call creative geniuses, is like this oscillating between different kinds of moods or different kinds of personalities, like phasing in and out. And it seems like one of the things for him was this intense ambition to have a successful band while also wanting to be free, and those things would kind of pull at each other at times. What did you notice about that tension?
Well, the pressure on Kurt came from himself and from his own mixed feelings that you're referring to. Of course, those of us that were in business with him wanted the band to be as successful as possible, whether it's the label or us. But the power relationship of artists by the early 90s with record companies and managers and booking agents and publicists was, the artist was the boss. So it's not like anyone could require him to do an interview he didn't want to do, or a festival he didn't want to do, or a music video he didn't want to do. But he himself, having hit that moment of being on MTV all the time, liked being on MTV. He watched MTV all the time himself, and he wanted that success. And then he also hated some of the things that he had to do in order to maximize the chance of maintaining or growing that success. And he also had come of age in a punk rock culture that had contempt for commercial rock and roll because it was considered shallow and superficial. And he cared a lot about being true to the culture that inspired him as a kid, the culture of bands like Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys and the Pixies and the Melvins, none of which had a fraction of the commercial success of what Nirvana had. And he cared about kind of trying to imagine what he would think of Nirvana if he was 16. And he didn't want to disappoint that part of himself, but he also he liked success. He that was part of the dream of rock and roll. Rock and roll is not like being just a poet or an artist whose art purely for art's sake. The essence of rock and roll includes connection with the mass audience, and that includes doing the things to stay connected to them. So that kind of a self-induced pressure certainly weighed on his mind a lot, and a certain amount of self-loathing about, now he's the successful guy and he doesn't want to betray his teenage self. And then also because of the particularity of the times and his relationship with Courtney, he really hated the visibility that his personal life had in the media. And that really was a source of a lot of pain and angst. So, but at the same time, like when In Utero was being finished, which was the follow-up to Nevermind, and by this time he's a global star, and he wanted to work with Steve Albini, who had all this punk rock credibility and was the quintessential outsider and critic of the major labels and all that stuff. He still talked to me about, well, what's the first single? What's the second single? He remixed, the two singles. There was some press at the time claiming that the label made him remix it. No one, by contract, he had complete control, and as a terms of the power relationship, there was no chance that anyone was going to, quote unquote, tell him what to do. But he wanted to have a hit, and Heart Shaped Box was a hit single. And I think part of it was that he was remixed by Scott Litt, put the vocal a little more up front and had a little warmer, radio-friendly sonics to it, even while it was just a mix. There were no new overdubs or effects put onto it. So, he cared about that, and he was very, very focused on doing the things required to be successful, while at the same time really disliking some of the byproducts of the success that he created. So it was that thing, that inner contradiction. But his demons were not rooted in success. Kurt had shot heroin before he ever was successful, before he ever had a record deal. He was prone to depression and stomach aches and things like that long before he was ever successful. Success didn't cause those things. Success did give him the dreadful truth that success itself wasn't going to, quote unquote, make him completely happy inside his heart, that there were sources of pain inside himself that success didn't fix. And there's a certain despair can come with that, of thinking, if I only was successful, I'd be happy. And then you get the ultimate success and credibility. And, sort of 2/3 of it makes you happy, or half of it makes you happy. And the other half leaves your pain completely untouched and creates some new pressures having to do, like I said, with the visibility and all that stuff. So, it was complicated, but he was not successful by accident. He was successful on purpose.
Yeah. One of the things that I was just curious about, that stuck out to me from the book was that you mentioned, related to sobriety, that you had given him 2 Hindu statues. Could you touch on what those were, and I guess what the meaning of those were to you?
Well, it's funny because a lot of the punk rock culture of the '80s was sort of had a great amount of sort of contempt for some of the hippie baby boomer culture. Part of it was just, generational competition.
Yeah.
Every generation wants to differentiate themselves from their parents' generation, and sometimes with a certain amount of anger and distance. And part of it was, I think people saw it as naive and not dealing with the true ugliness of life to just say, there was that song, Get Together, everybody love your neighbor, try to smile on your neighbor, try to love everyone right now. And in Nirvana, in one of their songs, I think it was Territorial Pissings, but you would know which one it was. Chris Novoselic did this kind of garbled vocal kind of mocking of that actual line from the Youngbloods' kind of Summer of Love hit, Get Together. But then Kurt would say, "Look, we're not making fun of hippies. We're making fun of the fact of the people who betrayed the hippie values, not the values themselves. The hypocrisy of it, not the original aspiration of it. So I knew there was a side of him that identified with the sort of pure idealistic soul of that idea, and it was an idea that had totally created my personality. I was 13. I think 13 years older than Kurt. Was born in '67. I was born in '50, so I was 17 years older than him. But I do believe, I did become kind of a meditator as a result of that, and was attracted to kind of the Hindu pantheon, so to speak. And, it was just what I could do, because I had those statues myself of Durga, which is an incarnation of the Divine Mother, who usually pictured sitting on a tiger, and Ganesha, who is an incarnation of God that took the form of an elephant, and you see them in stores and all over India. And once he had a drug problem, I just felt so helpless, like people do when they're involved with a drug addict. And he didn't particularly connect with 12-step program, which is unfortunate, because 12-step program has saved the lives of so many people, including a lot of people that are close to me. But it's not for everybody, and it wasn't for him. So, you think of, well, what can you do? People say, why, can't somebody stop somebody from being a junkie? And, you can urge them to get treatment. You can urge them to go to 12 steps. It's not, you can see if there's a therapist that maybe would work for them. That works for some people. And there's a prayer, and, I'm a prayer, and I just thought it would be a good vibe. Corny had this connection to Buddhism, and would chant. I can't think of the exact words of the chant that she would do. As far as I know, she still has that practice. But Kurt didn't have anything like that. So I think for one Christmas or something, went to, there are stores that sell kind of, statues. They're not super antiques, but they're nice, brass things. And I think I got him a Durga and a Ganesha. I don't remember if it was the same year. If 1 year it was Durga, 1 year it was Ganesha. It was a short amount of time, but it was more than a year that I knew him. It was 3 years and 3 months, between, that I knew him. And that's during that time is when he had all the success.
Yeah, I thought that part was interesting, because the way I had come across your work was through Raghu Marcus and the Ram Dass camp. So yeah. So I thought it was interesting to hear about that in the book.
He's I've got a note to write a note to Raghu today about something else. Yeah, he's still a very good friend of mine.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll link the website and the book in the description. You've written several other books as well. Is there anything that you'd like to let people know about, or where they can find you online?
I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter. So I'm a little slow adapter. So I'm not. I'm on Instagram, but only really to look at what my friends and clients and kids are doing. I don't post on Instagram. It's and same with TikTok.
You're not
So
doing TikTok dances?
no, not so far. But so I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I think it's Danny Goldberg 67 or something along those lines in Twitter, because I went on Twitter when I'd written an earlier book called In Search of the Lost Chord, 1967, and the hippie idea, which was sort of my description of that period that I'm referring to. It's the year I graduated high school and the year that Kurt was born. It's kind of a history. It's not a memoir of the hippie period. It's sort of a subjective history of it, because I was mostly just a kid and wasn't a participant in the things I write about. I'm happy with that. I've written 5 books. They're all listed on Amazon. I hope to have another one a few years from now. I'm a couple of, I'm starting to work on something, but it's at least a year away from being done and another year away from being published. So I still have a small management company called Gold Village Entertainment, and work with the Waterboys and Steve Earle and a number of other artists that mean a lot to me. But I'm grateful to talk about Kurt Cobain and Nirvana anytime. I know that no matter what I do in my life, if I do have if there are any obituaries of me, it'll say former Nirvana manager Danny Goldberg. There's nothing I'm ever going to be able to do that's going to make as much of an impact as working with Kurt.
Well, thanks a lot for writing the book. It was a pleasure to read, and it was fun to talk to you today. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.